I just recorded an entire video, like over 10 minutes, and I had my microphone muted the whole time. So let's do this again. Chief's advice to new NCOs. Hi everyone, I'm EJ Hunyadi, and I'm a warrant officer. I have a lot of experience in this area because I was an active duty Marine from 1986 to 1997. I left the Marine Corps as a staff sergeant, and then I joined the Army National Guard 20 years later as a staff sergeant in fire direction and became a warrant officer. And I've helped mentor a lot of junior NCOs. And I thought, because the majority of the questions I receive from people on all the social media platforms that I'm on and via email and in person is, what is advice you would give to new NCOs? So that's what this video is right here. First and foremost, congratulations on either becoming a new NCO or soon to be a new NCO. This is a really big deal. This means that your leaders have the faith and confidence that you are going to make a good leader. Now, what they are not saying is that you're going to be perfect. They don't expect you to be perfect. They know you're going to make mistakes. And if they're good leaders, they're going to allow you to make certain mistakes just so you learn those lessons. But the key takeaway for you is don't make the same mistakes twice. That's the really important part. The second big thing is your subordinates want to be led. This is something a lot of new NCOs just don't understand, or they don't really get, is that their subordinates want to be led. A common mistake a lot of new NCOs make is to either try to be buddy-buddy with their former peers, or they go the other direction completely and they go way too hard, ghosting their friends, pretending that those relationships never existed, and going way too hard. There's a happy medium, and you can find that, and it's different for everyone. And a lot of it is going to depend on your subordinates, because your friends have to understand that when you're at work, it is work. And when you're not at work, you guys can be buddies and pals and everything, just like you always were. I've been in this situation on both sides. I used to have my section come over all the time when I was on active duty, and we would have barbecues, we'd watch football games together, fights, all kinds of stuff. But they knew that as soon as we went back to the office, it was a very much, I was the leader, I was in charge, and they weren't allowed to just call me by my first name or just be buddy and pal with me, right? We had to be professional. Now, it doesn't mean that you have to be robots and completely pretend that you don't know each other outside of the office. That's not what I'm saying, and that's not what we did. What I am saying is that they have to understand that there's times when you're going to tell them to do things that they don't like or they don't want to do. Doesn't matter, and it's nothing personal. It's really purely professional. On the flip side of that, I've been the subordinate where I've had people over here in my home who are far higher in rank than me, and me being in the National Guard, I've had some senior officers over, and the next morning I see them, and it's just like if I didn't know them outside of the office, right? Good morning, sir. Yes, sir. No, sir. Giving them the sir sandwiches when I'm talking to them. That's just how it is. Now, do we have a more personable relationship because we have a relationship outside of the military? Absolutely. But again, there's a happy medium that you have to find. Another thing is, when you're assigning tasks to your subordinates, you need to make sure that they understand what the desired outcome is. They need to understand explicitly, and the way you make sure that they understand this is you ask them to read back what the mission is. And then the next thing you're going to do is ask them how they plan on getting the job done. Let them come up with a plan. If you give your subordinates the ability to come up with a plan on how they're going to accomplish a task or a mission, you're giving them personal ownership, which builds pride in the work that they do, which means the quality of the work that they're going to give you is way better than if you're going to micromanage and give them every single step. Now, as you're listening to their plan of how they get things done, you may find that they're telling you something or explaining something that doesn't quite sound right, or from your past experience of having been in their position that it's not going to work out that way. So that's when you can say, if I was you, I would think about doing this instead. Now, if it's a safety issue, a safety violation, absolutely say, no, you can't do that. You have to do it this way. Here's why. Now, after time, you're going to learn which subordinates of yours you can just assign a task to and just fire and forget, and then which ones you have to really explain things to and break it down Barney style. But that's part of the process of being a new NCO, is learning not only yourself, but learning your subordinates. And counselings are a two-way street. It should never be just you dictating to someone, even if somebody's in trouble, even if they've done something wrong. It should never just be you talking directly to them and not listening to what they're saying. It should always be a two-way conversation. I have found that the most effective counselings are often informal counselings. The ones where you just happen to see someone in the hallway and, oh, you know what, I had something on my mind I wanted to talk to them about. Just grab it. They're not doing anything. Grab them. Hey, let's have a chat. Let's talk. And just ask them what's going on, how they're doing, and if you have any feedback or any input for their performance, their work, you can give it to them at that time. And I've found that the most effective conversations that I've ever had with any of my subordinates have always been these informal ones. The formal ones, for me, have always been like a summary of all the informal counselings we've had. So my counselings literally will state things like, as we've discussed, as we've talked about, as discussed previously. And typically the soldiers or the Marines that I was doing the counselings with always remembered, obviously, that, yeah, we talked about that, we discussed this, and there's nothing new. There's no surprises to them. I've never had a situation where a counseling was adversarial because I was blindsiding my subordinate with anything. If it's in a counseling, even if it was just a regular counseling, we've talked about it before. Now, the next thing is, this one's kind of funny to some people, but it's super important. So you see that second lieutenant over there? The one who's looking really lost? That's because they are lost. They're more lost than you are, right? You have the benefit of your prior service, right? From E1 through E3. So that lieutenant over there most likely doesn't have that, right? There are the O1Es. That's not who I'm talking about here. Go talk to that lieutenant. Give them a hand. Explain to them that as an NCO, you're there to help them. But there's certain things you need them to do to help you. Build those relationships early, because that second lieutenant one day might be your company or battery commander, or even your battalion commander or higher. Building those relationships now with that second lieutenant as you're a new NCO, and even as you gain more responsibility and more rank later in your service, always building those relationships with the second lieutenants and becoming a resource to them will always help both of you in the future. Now, remember I talked about yelling earlier, and I said I'd come back to that? We're to it now, all right? Don't be the guy who yells all the time. First of all, it's not necessary. Second, if you're yelling, it's probably because something didn't go right, something didn't happen, and there's always a chance that problem was due to a lack of communication on either side, right? So now, there are times when there's a safety violation. That needs to be addressed immediately. And safety violations often need to be addressed as quickly as possible. And yelling is the only way to get that done. That's completely understandable, and that's fine. And that's not what I'm talking about here. What I'm talking about is every time you address your subordinates, you don't need to yell. You don't need to be putting on that war face. You can talk to them. They're humans too. And you need to give them the same respect that you would like to have from your leaders. Yelling doesn't make you strong, just like not yelling doesn't make you look weak. Knowing the appropriate time is what's important. Treating your subordinates with respect is super important. And if you want to gain credibility with your subordinates, when you treat them with respect, that gains you so much more respect from the other subordinates as well. Don't ever correct someone over forcibly or in public if you don't have to. Again, safety violations are the exception. That you have to correct on the spot. It doesn't matter where they are, what time it is, who's around. You have to stop that immediately. But if there's a correction you can make by pulling someone to the side and talking to them so you're not embarrassing them in front of everybody else, that's preferred. Now, there are times when you've talked to somebody and taken them to the side a few times and that doesn't seem to be working, and sometimes peer pressure does help. But what you should not do is punish your entire section or your entire squad for something one person did. Nobody ever respects that leader. I don't. Even now, as a warrant officer, there have been times recently where I am part of a larger group and we all have to do something unsavory because of one person. Now, personally, I hate that. It's inconveniencing me, and I am now being punished for someone else. And it's not like I'm going to go to that person and say, hey, we're all doing this because of you, because I'm a professional and I'm not going to do that, especially at my rank. Don't be that leader. It's always a good idea to try to fix or solve any correction you need to do with the least amount of anxiety or stress possible. Now, there are training environments where this obviously will not apply. Basic training, boot camp, for example. But for the rest of the time, if you can make that correction as a human, right, with a little bit more kindness, it's welcome. It's not weakness, by the way, right? This leads us into our next thing, and that is that you are there to make the mission succeed, right? That's always the first priority, obviously. But very, very close to that, right, is to teach, to train, to mentor your subordinates so that they succeed in those missions. Your job is to empower your subordinates to power through any mission that you give them, to complete any task that they have. What you do is you make sure they have the right training. They're armed with everything they need to be successful, not only in your mission and tasks, but in their own military career, even in their private lives. They're going to be turning to you for all kinds of advice. And it's going to be sometimes in things you know nothing about. And that's when it's going to be incumbent on you as a new leader to seek out further resources to help them. Another thing that a lot of new leaders forget is you are going to become their advanced MOS instructor, right? Your subordinates, they came out of MOS school. They may have a year or two of experience, but if they come across problems in the job that they don't know how to solve, they're coming to you. You are the one who is expected to know how to handle these problems, how to fix that machine, how to engage that target, all these things that are more advanced level MOS knowledge type things, you are now expected to be the expert on. That means you are the one who needs to continue to learn. You need to keep digging into doctrine and regulations and all those pubs. You need to stay on top of your MOS because you are now the steward of your MOS. You're the person that is the go-to. So always keep learning. Always be reading. That's another thing. Talk to your command sergeant major or your first sergeant. Talk to your company or battery commander, or even your battalion commander. Find out what their reading list is. What do they recommend that you read to become a better leader? And I guarantee you, good leaders are always reading, and they will have recommendations on books for you to read. Audiobooks count, by the way. So don't think that just because you don't actually like physically reading, you can listen to books too. I do that all the time when I'm working out in the gym. When I've got my ear pods on, I'm not necessarily listening to music. A lot of times I am, but not always. There are times when I'm listening to audiobooks because I have to keep learning. Now, as being that technical leader to your subordinates, you need to make sure that you're correct. So again, the other reason you're always reading doctrine and regulations and publications is to make sure you're correct and make sure you're safe and make sure that you're giving the correct information to your subordinates. So always use those checklists. Don't just rely on your memory. Always be safe. Be the example of what you want your subordinates to do because they're going to emulate you. If you take shortcuts in safety, they're going to take shortcuts in safety. If you take shortcuts in wearing your PPE, they're going to do those same shortcuts. It's the same thing with wearing your uniform. If you have pride in your uniform, you're always looking out for how your uniform looks, they're going to do the same thing. Your subordinates are a reflection of you. So if you go and you see your section and they all look like a sack of rocks, You need to look in the mirror and see what type of image you are portraying to your subordinates. Now, as a leader, you also need to be humble because you're not perfect. You never will be perfect. You're going to make mistakes. And sometimes those mistakes are going to be brought to your attention by your subordinates. The right way to handle it is to thank them and to make the correction. The wrong way is to yell at them, to deny it, to try to find a reason why you're right and why they're wrong. Just be the bigger person. You will gain so much respect from not only that person, but from the other subordinates if they see that you're not infallible and that you are, in fact, human just like them, and that when you make mistakes, you handle it properly. Remember when I said earlier about how your subordinates are a reflection of you? If they see you handle corrections with grace, they're going to do the same thing because they're going to see that that's the right way to act when you're corrected. So you're not above it. You're going to make mistakes. Most of the time, it'll be your leaders who point it out to you. Sometimes it'll be your subordinates. Accept that correction with some class. Now, really low on my list is this next point, which is what I always see as the first point when people give advice to NCOs or to new leaders, which is emulate the good and avoid the bad that you've seen before. And the reason why it's so low on my list is because this is one of those obvious ones, right? You know what a good NCO looks like. You know what a bad NCO looks like. It should go without saying that you want to emulate the good and you want to avoid the bad. But here we are. I'm saying it because just in case you've never heard this, here it is. And like I said earlier about reading, always be learning. This is just the very beginning of your career as a leader. And even if you don't plan on staying in the military for 20 or more years, when you leave the military, guess what? You're still a leader. People are still going to look to you for leadership because they're going to know that you are a leader in the military and they're going to expect a certain level of leadership ability from you. So always be learning. Now, I think it's important to say at this point that as a new leader, this is when you should start deciding about whether you want to become a staff NCO and to stay in the NCO ranks or whether you want to go warrant officer. I say that not only because I'm a warrant officer, because in today's Army, the branch from when you decide to become a senior NCO and when you decide to become a warrant officer is a lot earlier in careers than it used to be. I would say as recently as 2 or 3 years ago, they expected the new warrant officer candidates to have been NCOs already for 4, 5, 6 years. Today, we're looking at much newer NCOs. We're talking about if you've been a sergeant for 2 years, maybe you should start looking at becoming a warrant officer. There's a lot of reasons why they're going that way, but ultimately what it comes down to is retaining quality leaders in the warrant officer cohort. So really take a look at becoming a warrant officer if you think you want to stay on the technical side of your MOS and become an expert in every facet of your MOS. And if you really have a passion for leading individuals, for leading subordinates, and taking care of their welfare and giving them advice, mentoring them and everything, you might want to stay in NCO. And that's fine. Both routes are perfectly fine. There's a third route, right? You could go commissioned officer. That's cool. And I know a lot of former enlisted that became commissioned officers, and that's a great route to go to. I don't have personal experience with that, so I'm not going to give advice on that. All right. I only know the other two routes, which is going staff NCO and going warrant officer. So the last thing I'm going to leave you with is be the leader you want to have, or that you'd like to have if you don't have a great leader. Be that person who you feel would be a leader you could look up to, that you could go to with your problems, that when they correct you, you know they're going to do it in a way that builds you and makes you a better person. And be the leader who empowers your subordinates to succeed in all aspects of their life. And then you will find that those subordinates, they're going to stick by you forever. The reason I know that I did a pretty darn good job as a staff sergeant in the Marines is because in my 20-year break of service from when I left the Marines to when I joined the Army National Guard, I received dozens and dozens of calls or emails every year from former subordinate Marines of mine looking for advice, looking for guidance, looking for leadership, looking for just some kind of feedback. And I was a civilian, they're a civilian, but they were still looking to me as a leader. So this journey that you are now embarked upon as a leader, this is your journey for the rest of your life. If you like this video, please like and subscribe. This really helps me out. I'm trying to grow my channel so that I can get information out to service members around the world. And the only way that that can happen is through the likes and subscribes with the way that the algorithms work. So please like and subscribe. I really appreciate it. If you have any questions, feel free to email me. I do have my email information available right here. And I try to answer every one of them. I also do my very best to answer every comment here as well. So thanks again for your time. And if you have any comments on this video, please give them. I'd like to see your input, your feedback on your advice to new NCOs. Thanks. I feel, blah, blah, blah.